Welcome to another episode of the MMA Lockcast. I'm your host, Manpreet, aka MMA Lock of the Night, your boy on social media at MMALOTN, and the architect behind the MMA Fight Archive, where we got over 6,000 fighter profiles for you to browse through and get direct links to past fights so you know exactly what to expect when these fighters step foot in the cage. Covering close to 20 different promotions from all over the world, there's always an event to research, predict, study, and bet on, and we'll ensure on the MMA Fight Archive you have all the tools you need to make educated bets and predictions for these upcoming cards. Again, check out the MMA Fight Archive for the rest of the month, or at least for the rest of 2025. I'll still be doing the 7-day free trial, but come the new year, I'm going to be axing that, and we're just going to be doing the straight sign-up. And I guarantee anybody that loves to enjoy breaking down fights, this service will save you a boatload of time and for a pretty insignificant fee if you take predicting and breaking down fights seriously. So make sure you leave no stone unturned by checking out the MMA Fight Archive. All right, we're talking about UFC 323 this week as we have a double headliner in terms of title fights. In the co-main event, we got the flyweight title on the line as Alexandre Pantoja looks to stave off the oncoming Joshua Van, who's pulled off 5 straight victories now in the span of a year and a half to earn him this title shot. But obviously that big win over Brandon Royval on the same night that Pantoja defended his title obviously makes a good case for himself to deserve this title shot. And then in the main event, we actually have a rematch between bantamweight champion Merab Dvalishvili, who is looking for his 4th title defense in 2025 as he takes on Petr Yan, a guy that he defeated in a fight night main event not too long ago. But it seems like the UFC has run out of options in terms of throwing people at Dvalishvili, so they're giving him Yan and hoping that Dvalishvili can achieve this goal and this record of defending his title 4 times in 1 calendar year. Now, the obvious elephant in the room here, you guys can see that I'm in a different setting than I am from the usual studio that you guys have come to know, at least since April. But that means I've moved. I've moved once again, and hopefully this is the home base now for the next at least 2 years. But obviously, studio not what I want it to be right now. This is actually the opposite side of the studio I want to show for you guys. But you know, we got 2 UFC events for the left for the year, and I thought, you know what, let's just leave it this way for now. And then over the Christmas holiday break, we got 4 or 5 weeks off from the UFC. And in that time, I'll pretty up this place, make it look a lot better, and you know, kind of revamp the brand a little bit as well, a little bit of a makeover, and obviously with the new place as well, I'll be, you know, making the studio look a little bit different. So I'm still trying to figure out what I really want to do. And again, this is the opposite side. So I'll actually be facing that way in the new year, and the background behind me will be what I want to put up. But again, just moved this past week and got a ton of stuff all over the place. So I'm just making do with what I got. So I appreciate the understanding from there. You guys just want the content. So I'm still going to give you guys the content. Don't worry about that. We got 2 UFCs left on the year. This weekend as well, though, we got UFC 323 on Saturday. Friday, we got PFL Mina 4, which I'll be breaking down on the Lock of the Night Patreon page. And then we got Cage Warriors 199, which I'll be breaking down in the form of the Legacy Warriors podcast, which will drop probably Thursday or Friday. And then again, big UFC 323 to cap off the weekend. All right, let's do a quick recap of this past, or at least the last UFC event. We did have an off week in between here. So let's quickly do that. Lock of the night play does come through for us. You know, kind of chalky, but I felt it was going to be, you know, the lock of the card. So I had to go with it. We went with Yakyaev. Under 1.5, he was going up against Rafael Cerquera. I knew he would just run through him, and that's exactly what he ended up doing. It only took him about 30 or so seconds to get Cerquera out of there, and we cashed that ticket with relative ease. And since the last time that I did the recap for the Lock of the Night play, we've gone 4-0 on Lock of the Night plays for. So we are now 59-38 on the year for a 61% hit rate. And then in terms of our Dog of the Night play, we do take an L there on Ryan Loder, who's unable to get much of his work going against Ismail Nordiev. So we take an L there. But I believe we went 2-2 or 2-3 since the last time I recapped this Dog of the Night for you guys. So that now brings our record to 55-67 for a 45% hit rate on the Dog of the Night play, but firmly in the profit there. So happy about that. All right. I don't want to waste too much more time. We're going to be talking about UFC 323 for this card. I believe we got 14 fights on this card. So got plenty to get through. So let's get right into this. First fight up in the featherweight division, we got Muhammad Naimov coming in at plus 215, going up against Myron Santos, who comes in at minus 255. Now, Naimov is on a 2-fight winning streak now, where he's pulled off a victory over Khan Offley, and then last time around against Bogdan Grad, after he had fallen short against Felipe Lima by submission just a couple fights back. He's 31 years old, 13-3 record, but one of those guys that I have a little bit of a qualm with. Coming into the UFC, there were a few sketchy wins that he had through his first couple of UFC fights. The Nathaniel Wood one, he had some asterisks in that fight, specifically the last maybe minute or 30 seconds of that fight where Wood was wailing on him with big shots. And, throughout that fight, Naimov was committing some fouls, groin kicks, all that stuff. And then even holding the glove of Wood as Wood was nearly finishing him near the ending of that round. Then the Eric Silva fight, Eric Silva seemed compromised going into that matchup, and Naimov was able to take full advantage, and he was able to get the quick finish there. And then I think it was the first fight for Naimov where he went up against Jamie Malarkey, was losing pretty much every minute of that fight until he landed the big shot to get Malarkey out of there. And then we finally got Felipe Lima, getting that win over Naimov to really stop that momentum that Naimov was building for himself. But, I'll give him credit for his Offley and Grad wins. The Grad fight a little bit closer, but Naimov was able to just grind out some crucial minutes there, land some big shots. Power puncher with some decent grappling if he needs it. Trains out of Colorado as well. Decent promise, but a guy that I think has been slightly overrated in the early part of his UFC career. Now he's going up against Myron Santos, who's going to be looking for his 5th straight victory and his 3rd straight in the UFC, 4th, technically, if you want to count his Ultimate Fighter finale win that he had over Khan Offley. But he had a very sketchy decision win over Francis Marshall that a lot of people remember from back, I believe, in March, I think it was. And then shortly thereafter, he took a pretty quick fight against Sadiq Youssef up at 155 pounds, and he pretty much shut out Youssef on the scorecards there in a fight that, the 30-27s don't really showcase how close of a fight it was, but I thought Santos did enough in each round to really just plant his flag that he won that fight. Santos is a nasty Muay Thai specialist who started off around the same gym as Jessica Andrade in Brazil, but has now set up shop in Extreme Couture over the last couple of years. And I thought the best thing that he did was go up to 145 pounds because the one loss that he has on his record was down at 135 when he went up against Dan Argueta under the LFA cage, or the LFA lights, and it seemed like he was very much suffering from the weight cutting issues that he had going into that matchup. But at 145 pounds, 25 years old, this kid is very promising. He's a very bright prospect, especially with how good his takedown defense looks. He's normally a guy that is able to keep fights upright and then just batter his opponents on the feet, where he often has an advantage in that realm. Here against Naimov, I think he's going to be the slicker striker, and I think he's going to be able to land more leg kicks, land good combinations, counter the power punching of Naimov, and I'm assuming Naimov will eventually be looking for takedowns, but I think he's going to struggle to get Santos in those positions, and this should lead to Santos butchering him on the feet, and I think it could even go so far as finding the finish against Naimov. I think he is a much superior striker here, so I'm going to go Santos, and Santos by knockout. Next up in the middleweight division, this one I'm going to gloss over pretty quickly because the odds are unplayable, but I feel like it's pretty much a foregone conclusion, as in this middleweight matchup, we got Mansoor Abdul-Malik coming in at minus 1,000, going up against Antonio Trocoli, who comes in at plus 700. Abdul-Malik has largely squashed a lot of his competition, although there are some fights where he probably could have put his foot on the gas a little bit quicker, but I expect him to really just subdue Trocoli with relative ease here, landing big shots of his own, shutting down some of the takedowns that Trocoli may be looking to implement. But I think for the most part, Abdul-Malik will just bomb on him, and he should be able to get him out of there pretty quickly. There have been people that kind of accuse him of just dragging fights on longer than they should, but I feel like this is one of those matchups where he can really land that big shot and get Trocoli out of there quickly. His explosivity, his speed, his power, it's going to be too much for Trocoli, but we don't play minus 1,000 around these parts. I'll be looking more so at Abdul-Malik round 1 or the under 1.5 if they're at decent enough lines. Otherwise, I don't mind passing on this, but I think Abdul-Malik wins this fight by knockout. All right, next up, we got a car crash of a light heavyweight matchup here between Iwo Baraniewski coming in at minus 185, going up against Ibo Aslan, who comes in at plus 160. Now, Baraniewski comes in with a 6-0 undefeated record after picking up his contract to the UFC this past season on the Contender Series, where he was able to knock out Muhammad Ali in 20 seconds. Nope, not the Muhammad Ali that you're thinking of, but a Brazilian fighter named Muhammad Ali, who is a high-level BJJ black belt and was a pretty big favorite going into that fight against Baraniewski. But Baraniewski didn't look at the odds, it seems like, because he went in there and acted like the favorite, landed his big shots, and eventually landed those big ground and pound strikes to put the nail in the coffin. Normally, this is a guy that looks to take opponents to the ground and smash them from that top position, where he often is able to pull off early finishes with all of his wins coming in the first round. Whether he's looking to submit his opponents or establish a dominant position and rain down ground and pound, it's clear that Baraniewski knows he's not getting paid by the minute, so he wants to get in and out of there as quickly as possible. He has some big power shots, but I think he is best when he looks to take opponents to the ground and establish that dominant position from top control. Now he's going up against Ibo Aslan, who's looking to buck a 2-fight losing streak, most recently coming up short against Billy Alicana in a very pedestrian performance where Alicana was able to just land a little bit more strikes and be a little bit more effective when they did let those hands fly, which did not seem all that often with how much they were staring at each other. I think Aslan was more so expecting Alicana to shoot more, and when he did and Aslan was able to stop the takedown, he kind of laughed, he giggled, he waved his finger as well, like, hey, you're not going to get me down. And I think that's why Aslan decided to do that training camp in Dagestan. But it seems like for this matchup, he's been training over at Extreme Couture, taking advantage of the UFC PI, which was just down the street as well. And obviously with this fight taking place in Vegas, not a bad place to have a training camp. He has some decent bodies to work with over there at Extreme Couture as well, but I think he's still very much married to that power punching style, looking to walk his opponents down, land those big shots, continuously improving his takedown defense. Like he showed it even in the Iwan Kutelaba fight, who was looking to take Aslan down early and often, but Aslan was able to stop most of those takedowns until he got hit with a big shot and couldn't stop the takedown after that, and eventually got submitted by Kutelaba. I think Aslan has been somewhat overrated throughout his career, largely getting by being the more physical and athletic fighter in the cage and able to land those big shots, but we're slowly seeing him just massage his way through the UFC and progressing and becoming a better fighter and looking for better ways to utilize his athleticism and his power to try to be more successful. He's going to need all of that here against Baraniewski, who I think is going to be looking to get this fight to the ground and try to get that quick finish as he normally does. It seems to me that Baraniewski is in a similar situation to what Aslan used to be earlier in his UFC career, where he came in as the favorite because of what he was able to do on the regional scene. But it's a trial by fire thing here for Baraniewski, whether he's going to be able to get through Aslan. I think he has the skill set to do so, but I think it's minus EV to try to play Baraniewski at this number, especially when you consider the type of experience Aslan has been able to accrue. And if he shuts down the takedowns of Baraniewski, he might be able to touch him up on the feet. I'm still going to lean Baraniewski. I think he has a little bit more tools. It's just his inexperience that gives me a little bit of pause in terms of trying to take a shot on him here. I wouldn't mind taking a look at the under 1.5. I'm expecting this to be a little bit more of a car crash than anything, but I expect Baraniewski to be the one to come out with his hand raised. But this is one of those fights where we have to play the numbers. And I just don't think that this is a spot where, minus 185 is worthy of a shot on the UFC newcomer. So I'm going to go Baraniewski inside the distance, but I would rather entertain the under 1.5 than his money line here. All right, next up, we got a lightweight scrap between Edson Barboza, who comes in at plus 250, going up against Jalen Turner, who comes in at minus 300. Now, Barboza is looking to buck a 2-fight losing streak of his own, as he's coming off of losses to Lerone Murphy in a main event, and then last time around against Trocoli Close, who was able to really shut Barboza's game down and just outstrike him on the feet, mix it up in the clinch realm as well, and really stay away from the dangerous Muay Thai game that we know Barboza has. Barboza is a guy that will be 40 in January, so I'm happy that he is not looking to cut down to 145 pounds anymore, as we know that used to be a big cut for him to make back in the day. His last fight before the Trocoli Close fight was actually scheduled for 145 pounds, but he pulled out of it, and then the close fight was back up at 155 pounds, and now this fight pretty much cements that he's always going to be fighting at 155 before he decides to hang the gloves up. Even at this age, he still has some nasty leg kicks, some good Muay Thai, some good pop on his shots, but his durability is still a bit of an issue. His defensive grappling is a bit of an issue. And at 40 years old, a lot of those hardware things in his game are going to start to deteriorate, and that's where younger fighters are going to be able to get the better of him. Sadiq Youssef nearly beat him, almost finished him early, but then blew his gas tank and ended up coming up short over the next couple of rounds. But it's going to be tough for Barboza to get his hand raised at this age, especially with the way the UFC looks to be booking him. Now he's going up against Jalen Turner, who had a short-lived retirement after retiring after that matchup against Ignacio Bahamondes from earlier this year, where he got the takedown but ended up putting himself into a triangle choke and was submitted by the Chilean fighter that night. But Turner said that he was brought in with Ian Machado Gary to help Gary prepare for the Carlos Prates fight, and that fight reignited the fire in Turner, knowing that he still had a few years left to perform at his best. Being 30 years old, he decided to just get that bag a little bit more, get back into the MMA cage, and try to achieve the potential that a lot of people expected from him before this 1-4 run that he's currently on. His run got him to a solid fight against Mateusz Gamrot, and that was a close fight that he lost by split decision, and then unfortunately after that he ended up losing to Dan Hooker. So unfortunate run for Jalen Turner, and even though he retired, I feel like this is one of those spots that he hasn't been out of the cage all that long, especially helping guys like Gary train for fights. He's still training with high levels guys. He's still staying in shape. And now with him having the fire back, we might be able to see some of that killer instinct and some of that potential we expected from him earlier on in his career. And again, he's only 30 years old still. So now coming in against Edson Barboza, I really think it's going to be his speed and power that allows him to connect on Barboza early and often, and then I think that will eventually lead to a finish here for Turner. Some people may be looking to fade the tarantula because of that retirement talk, but I think he's getting Barboza at the perfect time. If this was a 35-year-old version of Barboza, maybe I would consider this plus 250 number on him, but I feel like Turner just has that speed that's going to cause Barboza trouble, and if Turner can find that button, I think he's going to be able to put him out. It's kind of hard for me to choose between knockout and submission because I know Turner doesn't mind that club and sub if he finds that opportunity there, but I feel like he's going to bonk, definitely not boink. Boink is not the term you want to be using in fighting, but I think Turner will be able to bonk Barboza down the pipe and probably just get that TKO finish here. So I'm going to go Turner. I'm going to go Turner inside the distance, and I lean KO more than submission. All right, next up, we got a middleweight scrap here between Marvin Vettori, who's coming in at minus 115, going up against Bruno Ferreira, who comes in at minus 105. Now, Vettori's on a 1-4 run right now over his last 5 fights. It really has not looked good. He had a 5-fight winning streak going into that title fight against Israel Adesanya back in June of 2021, but now he's 2-5 since that fight, with 2 of his wins coming against a very unmotivated Paulo Costa, who, if you guys remember, that was that fight week where they were supposed to main event an Apex Fight Night, supposed to take place at middleweight, and then I think on like Tuesday or Wednesday of fight week, Paulo Costa's like, I'm not cutting weight, so we're going to fight at 205, and Vettori obliged, and he was able to just pretty much outwork Costa that entire fight. Then Vettori came up short against Robert Whittaker. Then he got that close decision victory over Roman Dolidze, and then since then it's been nothing but red for Vettori as he's come up short against Jared Cannonier, a rematch against Roman Dolidze, and then last time around against Brendan Allen. Now the circumstances going into that Allen fight were very tough for Vettori, who had lost his brother, who he was very close with. His brother died in a house fire, I believe, that was due to, I think he fell asleep while there was something cooking on the frying pan or something like that. His house engulfed in flames and pretty much killed him. So very unfortunate circumstances there for Vettori. But now, separating himself from that a little bit more, having a fight after that, and now trying to just refocus himself. Maybe we see glimpses of him at his best. He obviously hasn't been at his best since 2021, but this is a guy still at 32 years old that is capable of having some solid success with, his bullying tactics. This guy's strong. He's durable. He's never been finished in mixed martial arts. He's not much of a finisher himself. I think he's always had 2 finishes throughout his UFC career. 2 of his 17 fights have finished inside the distance inside the UFC, and that's just due to him not being much of a power puncher, but he's very much a bully with how he utilizes his strength and physicality to get, push opponents back, clinch them, maybe look for takedowns as well. That's kind of the approach that we normally see from a guy like Vettori. Now he's going up against another very physical fighter here who's really trying to make a name for himself in the middleweight division, and Bruno Hulk Ferreira, who is now 4-1 over his last 5 fights, so a complete opposite of what Vettori has been going through. Ferreira last time around was able to make short work of UFC newcomer and short notice debutant Jackson McVeigh, finishing him with an armbar in that first round. Prior to that, he was able to catch Armin Petrosyan in the armbar as well, in a fight that I thought Petrosyan was doing a pretty good job in terms of shutting down the power punching style of the Brazilian. Prior to that, we had the Abus Magomedov fight that seemed to be 1-1 going into that final round, but it seemed like Ferreira was running out of gas, as you would expect from a guy that does not often see the third round. That was the only time he'd seen the third round. In his 16 pro fights, he's never seen the scorecards, only seen the third round once, and he's only ever seen the second round 4 times. It's clear he's a kill or be killed fighter, but both of his losses have come in the UFC at the hands of Nursultan Ruziboev, who was able to just counter him down the pipe, utilize that range advantage, and get Ferreira out of there, and then obviously that Abus Magomedov submission. Ferreira is a BJJ black belt and is a guy that often looks to take opponents to the ground and look for finishing positions sooner than later. He has very good ground and pound, and he also has a nasty submission game, especially with that armbar he's been able to pull off in back-to-back victories now. Here against Vettori, I think this is a pretty big step up for Ferreira. This is a guy going up against a very experienced UFC fighter who has, I believe, just as many, or actually more UFC fights than Ferreira has pro fights. And we know Vettori has fought the best and the worst of the middleweight division, from the champion in Israel Adesanya to eventual contenders or even former champions like Robert Whittaker. Vettori is just a tough guy to beat, especially with the durability he brings to the table. So when you take into consideration that Vettori is just a guy that is tough to put away, and then you have a guy in Ferreira who is either kill or be killed, it brings a very interesting dynamic to this matchup. Are we going to see the Vettori decision machine come through again, where Ferreira struggles to finish him, but Vettori bullies him and wins a decision? Or does Ferreira finally crack the chin or crack the submission defense of Vettori and submits him? I'm leaning more so with the Vettori side here. I know it doesn't look great with the red all on his last 5, but this is a definite step down in competition compared to what he's been going up against as of late, maybe with the exception of Roman Dolidze. But I think we're going to see Vettori come back with a little bit more of a I don't even want to say fire under him because I think that's a little bit crude, to say given the circumstances and all from the past, but a little bit more of a urgency out of him, a little bit more willingness to scrap and implement his style. I think Ferreira will struggle to take him down. I think Ferreira will struggle to land a big enough shot to put him in trouble, and I think that will ultimately lead to Vettori just taking command of that fight, pushing Ferreira up against the cage, wearing him down, and running away with this in deep water. Thus, I'm going to go Vettori and Vettori by decision here. All right, next up, in the lightweight division, we got Nazim Sadykhov coming in at plus 110, going up against Ziam, who comes in at minus 130. Now, Sadykhov is one of those guys that kind of reminds me of a guy we spoke about earlier on the card in Muhammad Naimov. A lot of his wins in the UFC, there are some asterisks beside them, and it kind of makes him seem better than he is. Now, I just want to start off. I think he's a great fighter. I think he's maybe not great. I think he's a good fighter. I think he's a guy that has solid power in his hands, has some good grappling if he needs it as well. But when you look back at a lot of his performances, there was some iffiness to them. Let's start off with the Evan Elder fight. That was a fight where he was down on the scorecards and landed, I think it was a knee or a head kick that split open Evan Elder in the opening seconds of the third round, and that caused a stoppage from the doctor there. So like a Hail Mary shot in a sense for Sadykhov, opened a cut on Elder, got Sadykhov the win, which is interesting now because Elder is actually a close training partner of Sadykhov now. Then we had the Terrence McKinney fight. McKinney won that first round pretty dominantly, controlling the back of Sadykhov, but was unable to get the finish. We know the story with McKinney. We're going to be talking about him in a couple fights here, but he's a guy that is kill or be killed. If he doesn't get that finish in that first round, he's going to gas out, and his opponents are going to finish him. That's what Sadykhov was able to do. Then we had the Vyacheslav-Borshev fight where Borshev won the first round, outstriking Sadykhov. Sadykhov hurts Borshev very badly in the second round, gets a 10-8 on two scorecards. And then in the third round, we see Borshev battle back into that matchup and win that round, ultimately leading to that draw. So very close fight that Borshev probably could have won. We had the Ismail Bonfim fight, similar to the Evan Elder fight, where it was kind of competitive. I can't really say one way or the other who was going to win that fight should it have continued. But Sadykhov landed, I think it was a head kick of some sort, busted open the eye of Ismail Bonfim, or at least made it swell up pretty badly. And then I don't know what it was. I don't know if there was some sort of miscommunication between the translator, the doctor, and Bonfim, but then it seemed like when the referee waved off the fight based on the doctor's suggestion, Bonfim was quite bummed out about that, so we don't really get to see that fight go much deeper. Then we had the last fight, Nicholas Mota. That was in the home country of Sadykhov with Azerbaijan, and Mota hurt Sadykhov very badly, nearly finished him in the first round. Seemed like he emptied the gas tank trying to get Sadykhov out of there, and then Sadykhov ends up getting the finish in the second round. So, like I said, I'm being very nitpicky here. Maybe at a certain point we just have to believe that Sadykhov is a guy that with one moment can change the tide of a fight and get his hand raised. But is that enough to make him a favorite in fights or a guy that's as hyped as he is? Maybe, maybe not. He's an underdog in this matchup, ever so slightly. But there could be an argument that Ziam could deserve to be a bigger favorite. Now let's talk about Ziam here, who's on a very solid winning streak as of right now. He's looking for a 6th straight victory, looking to bounce or at least build upon that big win that he had over Mike Davis earlier this year. But I'm still going to say that was a pretty un-Davis-like performance. That was a very, an anomaly of a performance from Davis. We've never seen him shoot for takedowns or pull guard the way that he did early on in that fight. And then he seemed to be gassed, near the ending of that first round, and Ziam was able to just touch him up for the rest of that fight. But there have been great performances from Ziam. The Matt Frevola fight was a solid performance where he was able to stop the takedowns, batter Frevola on the feet, and then eventually get that late finish in that third round. Beautiful work. Ziam's really growing into himself since joining the UFC, and now at 28 years old, 17-4 record, improved grappling game. This kid's very dangerous, especially with the way that he strikes, how technical he is, how good he is in terms of maintaining range, his footwork, his combinations from distance, his striking game, his kicks, everything. It's really looking like it's coming together pretty well. And I love the path that the UFC is taking him on, especially with him 28 years old, 5-fight winning streak. Just continue to give him slight steps up in competition. I think Mike Davis is better than Sadykhov, but I think we'll see Sadykhov provide more resistance or tougher resistance than what Mike Davis did, which should help Ziam's experience as he continues to work up the lightweight rankings. So, minus 130 on Ziam. Is that a good line? I think so. Sadykhov is the more threatening fighter in terms of having the ability to finish the fight, more power in his hands, probably has a grappling edge there, but I believe in Ziam's defensive grappling improvements enough that he can force Sadykhov to strike with him, and then from there, I think just as we saw Vyacheslav Borshev, just as we saw Evan Elder, just as we saw Nicholas Mota outstrike Sadykhov, I think Ziam can do the same here, pick him apart from distance, maybe land a couple big shots, maybe even drop Sadykhov a few times. But I think for the most part, Ziam will just keep this at distance, pick apart Sadykhov, and then win this fight on the scorecards. I love this line at minus 130. Historically speaking, I've faded Ziam a few times. I think I faded him with lock of the night plays over his last 2 fights. So I'm not the biggest Ziam believer. But I think stylistically speaking, this is a good enough matchup for him to go out there and showcase his goods. So give me Ziam and Ziam by decision. All right, next up, in the women's flyweight division, we got the return. Knock on wood. The return. By the way, I don't want to knock too hard, but we got Alfred sitting over there on the couch, and any knocking will set the little guy off. So pretend I'm actually knocking on wood. Knock on wood, the return of Macy Barber, who comes in at minus 175, going up against Karine Silva, who comes in at plus 150. Now, starting off on the Macy Barber side of things here, she's coming off a victory over Caitlin Sermonara. She's on a solid winning streak right now as well. She hasn't tasted defeat in quite a long time. She went on a 2-fight losing streak back in 2020 and 2021, and now she has 6 straight victories, and she's had some pretty big spots where she probably could have earned herself a title shot or at least a number 1 contender spot, specifically her fight that she was scheduled for earlier this year when she was supposed to go up against Erin Blanchfield. Unfortunately, just before they were supposed to walk out, Barber was forced out of that fight. If you guys remember, she had missed weight as well the day before, but she was dealing with a lot of medical issues, and that eventually sent her to the hospital, minutes before she was supposed to make the walk to the cage. But again, still a solid fighter, 27 years old. She still has plenty of time to leave her mark on the sport. If you guys remember when she first came off the Contender Series, she was highly touted. A lot of hype on her. She was knocking chicks out. She had nasty head kicks, good striking, entertaining style, very physical, bullied a lot of her opponents as well with her physicality. And she's improved a lot of aspects of her game, specifically the defensive grappling and the takedown defense. When she's able to keep fights standing, opponents struggle with her tremendously. And we saw that in the Amanda Hebos fight where Hebos ended up getting knocked out by Barber. I did try to fade Barber with Caitlin Sermonara last time. I really thought if Sermonara was able to just utilize her classic style of sticking and moving, utilizing high output, then Sermonara would get her hand raised. As the underdog, I think she was. But for some reason, Sermonara decided to engage in the grappling and the clinch often with Barber. And anytime Sermonara did, Barber was able to reverse her immediately and then just bully her against the cage and win that fight pretty easily. At her best, Barber is a good striker with flashy technique and good power, especially for the women's flyweight division, and I think she is slowly coming into her own. This is a fighter that's bounced around at a lot of different training camps. She was at Factory X, I believe, as her second last training camp, but I now believe she's training somewhere in Colorado, I believe with a high-altitude team. So she's really, trying to gather as much experience as she can. I think she was with Jackson Wink for a while. I think she was with Team Alpha Male for a while, but now settling in Colorado. I'm very much excited to see what she brings to the table, especially with over a year and a half away from action now. Now she's going up against Karine Silva, who was able to bounce back into the win column last time around as she picked up a somewhat controversial decision win over Diony Barboza. And I was on Barboza that night. I like the big underdog number on her. The fact that Barboza already had a win over Silva. But Silva, did a decent enough job in terms of staying active off of her back, whether it was with submission attempts, landing shots of her own, while Barboza looked to just be holding on and try to maintain that top position without landing enough impact of her own to try to get the judges to score the fight in her favor. So good work from Silva, who, likes to fights to be on the ground, whether it's her chasing the takedowns and getting that top position, or even her off her back throwing up submissions and trying to continue her nasty finishing ways. She's only been to a decision 3 times in her 24-fight career, and all 3 of those fights were her last 3 fights. So the first one she won by decision against Ariane Lipski. She was able to just land more damage, get some good control time. Then she got grinded out by Viviane Araujo last time, and then we just talked about the Diani Barboza fight that she won by decision. But normally, she's very nasty with her jiu-jitsu, very good with clamping onto submissions. If you guys remember, I believe she tore the knee of Ketlin Souza 4 or 5 fights ago. She's very nasty on the ground, but when she can't get fights to the ground, that's when things start to look a little bit iffy for her, and that's where I think she could start to run into some problems here against Macy Barber. I think Barber will be more physical. I think she'll be stronger. I think she'll be the better striker. And I think she'll be a good enough defensive grappler to the point that she can keep this fight standing for the most part and then really butcher Silva on the feet. I think she's going to have a lot of success on the feet. And I think that could eventually lead to a Barber knockout as well. So the one thing I'll wait for is I'll wait for weigh-ins here. Again, if you guys have been following me for a while, I'm not a big weigh-ins guy. I don't usually let weigh-ins really sway me, but given the issues that Barber has had in recent fights, being pulled out of fights, missing weight, whatever it is, I want to see what kind of shape she's coming in and then go from there to decide whether I actually want to pull the trigger on her or not, especially at chalk, right? If she was an underdog, maybe pre-fight or pre-weigh-in, I'd be more content with taking a shot on her before her number goes one way or the other. But in this spot at minus 175, I think you could even put her closer to minus 230 if she comes in looking her best. I'd be fine to take that chalk if she looks in good enough shape, if she makes the weight as well on Friday. But that's what I'll wait for. But I'm going to go Barber and Barber by knockout. All right, next up, in the lightweight division, we got Terrence McKinney coming in at plus 140, going up against Chris Duncan, who comes in at minus 160. Now, we'll start off on the McKinney side of things, who's on a 2-fight winning streak now. But the more entertaining thing about McKinney is the fact that this guy hates the scorecards. He has never seen the scorecards in 24 pro fights. This is a guy, let's take this in. I got these numbers written down here for you guys. 20 of his 24 fights have finished in round 1, with 23 of his 24 fights finishing in under 1.5 rounds. All 11 of his UFC fights have finished under 1.5 rounds, with only 2 of them reaching round 2, yet still finishing under 1.5 rounds. He's fast, athletic, explosive, comes from a grappling background. So whether he lands that head kick and knocks his opponents out or knocks them down so he can jump onto a choke, or if he looks to take them to the ground and try to find a finish there, this guy is very good at getting. He's a top 10 lightweight for the first 2 to 3 minutes of a fight. After that, if he can't impose his will or get that finish, this guy falls off quickly. And guys are able to get the better of him. It seems like he has an issue in terms of managing his gas tank, but he may look at it as his initial game plan. He's been blessed with such athleticism, speed, and power that he wants to utilize that advantage ASAP and try to catch his opponents off guard, because some fighters like to fight and work their way into matchups, whereas McKinney is a firecracker right away. This guy will go for it immediately, get that finish. If he doesn't, he ends up getting finished himself, which is why I love betting his under 1.5s. I don't care what the number is. More often than not, especially in the UFC, always, his fights will finish under 1.5 rounds, even if he's fighting guys that often go to decisions. So I feel like that's something you should always tackle in a Terrence McKinney fight, whether you want to parlay it or play it straight. I don't even mind playing it straight. And given the numbers, given the stats, McKinney's under 1.5 is always a good spot. Now he's going up against Chris Duncan, who's having a little bit of a resurgence as well. He's on a 3-fight winning streak. He's looking to continue that run after having that submission loss against Manuel Torres. If you guys remember, I think that was a fight where he hurt Torres early, but then started to follow up with grappling, and then eventually found himself in a bad spot and got submitted. But since then, He submitted Blachowicz with a nasty guillotine. He submitted Jordan Vucenic with a nasty guillotine. And then he had the perfect game plan against Mateusz Rombeski, where he perfectly countered the blitzing attacks of Rombeski and just butchered him on the feet, met him with every instance, met him with a counter. And then as Rombeski starts to slow down as he normally does, Duncan put his foot on the gas and he was able to take advantage of that matchup and make it look very dominant when he was eventually able to get his hand raised on the scorecards there. Duncan, we've seen many variations of him. He came into the UFC and even the Contender Series as a headhunter. Then he went to his grappling. Then when the grappling wasn't working out, he found a way to get the perfect balance between striking and grappling, and now he's a well-rounded mixed martial artist. Now, in this matchup against McKinney, I think he'll come up with the perfect enough game plan to deal with that early blitz attack that we normally see from McKinney, whether it's countering that head kick of McKinney or forcing McKinney to wrestle hard and slow him down even quicker, and then from there get the finish, or even jump onto his patented guillotine from that position. But I think that this is a spot where Duncan's game planning will bail him out of those early bad spots, and I think that will lead to him eventually getting that finish. So I'm going to go Duncan here, and he's been selling out a lot for those guillotines, even against Rombeski, who's a BJJ black belt. I think Duncan could potentially do that here against McKinney, where McKinney, once he shoots in for one of those eventual takedowns, puts himself into a guillotine, and I think he ends up getting submitted there. So under 1.5, like I said, that's the spot to always jump on for McKinney fights, but the Duncan submission side is probably where I'm going to end up going here. So I'm going to go Duncan by sub, but under 1.5 in every McKinney fight is worth the shot, no matter the odds, in my opinion. All right, moving over to the lightweight division now, we got Grant Dawson coming in at -210, going up against Manuel Torres, who comes in at +180. Now, starting off on the Dawson side of things, he is now on a 3-fight winning streak after losing to King Green with a quick loss. You remember, if you guys remember, that was, I believe it was a main event, and Dawson got clipped with a jab and got put away pretty quickly by Green that night, which is funny. That's the same way he lost his first fight, which came in 35 seconds back on the regional scene, but he is still one of the best fighters in the lightweight division. And it may not be the most entertaining, but he is a damn good scrambler. He is a damn good wrestler, and he has improved his BJJ enough that he can threaten with submissions as well. This guy usually does a good job in terms of getting to a dominant position, raining down big shots and looking to put opponents away that way, but he's not a guy that is willing to often take many risks, and he would rather be way more position over submission or finishing, which is why I think the UFC is giving him the long way around to getting into that top 10 and top 5. Like, obviously, they gave him that main event slot against King Green because they're like, hey, let's give you the push. But unfortunately, he ended up losing that fight. But he's a guy, 31 years old, ever since transitioning to American Top Team after that draw that he had against Rick Glenn, he's really showcased a well-rounded game. His striking is obviously where he is most uncomfortable still. He still throws a lot of kicks, a lot of flashy techniques to eventually open up a surprise level change and takedown. But once he gets in on the hips of his opponents, it's more often than not that he's able to get these guys down and then get to his work in terms of just either submitting them or just keeping them in compromising positions and then looking for ways to either let go with damage or look for a submission. But it's the striking and the striking defense that he needs to continue working on so that he can get to his game without getting clipped and put away as he has in both of his professional losses. Now, he's going up against Manuel Torres, who is surely going to test the chin of Dawson with how violent this guy normally fights. This is a guy that I've often looked to try to fade in the UFC because I do not think he is as good as, one, his record makes him, and two, how big of a favorite he was earlier on in his UFC career. I think I faded him with Nicolas Mota. I think I faded him with Chris Duncan as well. But then I went back to the well with Ignacio Bahamondes, who I knew had enough of a striking advantage to really pick Torres apart, counter him effectively. I thought Bahamondes was probably going to decision him that night, or at least get a late finish, as I think Torres has a very sketchy gas tank. But Bahamondes finished him in the first round at the Sphere, and it was a very brilliant performance by the Chilean fighter. But Torres was able to bounce back last time around as he got a big win over Drew Dober, knocking Dober out in the first round and showing the power that Torres still is capable of. That fight, even though he did finish it in the first round, still showcased a little bit of maturity in Torres' game. We saw him a little bit more disciplined, a little bit more cautious. He wasn't so, keen on pushing his aggressive pace as he normally does. He was waiting for those openings, and he just knew he had a little bit more power and speed than Dober at the time. And once he found that opening, he took full advantage of it and eventually got the win over that UFC veteran. But this is a fight that will surely test him against Grant Dawson. Without a doubt, Dawson has a grappling advantage, but we know Dawson is going to have to go through hell and high water to try to get in on the hips on Torres early. But as this fight starts to drag on, I think we'll see Dawson get to those positions a lot easier. I think this is a spot where, Dawson, not known to be much of a finisher, can actually muster up a finish. I have big questions about Torres' durability or cardio, his gas tank. And I think he's going to be looking to take Dawson's head off early, knowing that that's what Dawson is often susceptible to. I think there will be spots where Torres could land a big shot. And I think that's where my hesitancy lays here in terms of labeling Dawson a lock of the night play. I think he wins. I have some fairly good confidence in him here too, because I think he is just a much better mixed martial artist. It's just the threat of that power from Torres, the sketchy durability of Dawson at times. We've seen him eat some big shots from Rafa Garcia and Diego Ferreira, and he was able to eat those and still get to his game, yet a jab took him out with King Green, who's not known to be much of a power puncher. So it's one of those spots where you're like kind of rolling the dice, and like more often than not, I think we'll see Dawson's chin hold up. And this is one of those spots with that, less than 70% indicated, I think is worthy of a shot on Dawson to still pull off the victory here. But I think the money to be made would potentially be with his inside the distance prop. So I like Dawson here. I think he gets to his positions. It's going to be sweaty early, without a doubt. But I think without a doubt, we'll see Dawson get those spots and eventually muster up either a submission or a TKO as Torres starts to slow, whether it comes in the second or third round. I think Dawson gets him out of there, and I think he makes it look dominant as long as he can avoid that early first-round finish from Torres. So give me Dawson and Dawson inside the distance. All right, next up, in the light heavyweight division, we got former champion Jan Blachowicz coming in at -140, going up against streaking upcoming contender Bogdan Guskov, who comes in at +120. Now, starting off on the Blachowicz side of things, he's on a 2-fight losing streak at the hands of Alex Pereira, which was actually the first fight for Pereira in the light heavyweight division in the UFC. And then obviously we know Pereira goes on to win the title after that. And then Blachowicz took off a bunch of time. I think he was dealing with the shoulder surgery. I think he didn't even fight the entirety of 2023. And then he came back in 2024. 2024, he didn't fight. And he was sidelined for about 2 years. And then in March 2025, he returned against Carlos Ulberg, who's obviously been streaking. And that was a pedestrian performance from both guys, but it was Ulberg who seemed to do enough for the judges to score that fight in his favor. But it seemed like a fight that Blachowicz was a little bit too passive. We've seen him more assertive in his fights. He likes that leg kick, that calf kick. Moving forward, he likes to get to utilize his BJJ as well. He has a ton of experience, coming into his, I think, 42nd professional fight this weekend, which matches his age now as well. He'll be 42 years old, or is 42 years old, which is usually not the best sign for a guy in the UFC, but you can give some leeway to the guys above 185 pounds. Once you get higher in weight class, age doesn't matter as much anymore because you're not worried about the reflexes. You're not as dependent on the hardware as much. And I think that's where we can give some leeway here to Blachowicz. And again, it doesn't look the prettiest, right? If you look over his last 5 fights, it starts with that title fight loss to Glover Teixeira, then that knee injury victory against Alexander Rakic, then the draw against Magomed Ankalaev for the vacant light heavyweight title, and then 2 losses after that. But I still think he has enough to offer here. Coming up short against guys like Pereira and Ulberg, not bad when you consider the type of skill sets those guys have. Here against Guskov, this is a good barometer to see whether Blachowicz still has enough to be successful fighting at this level, or if you should start considering hanging up the gloves. He's going up against Guskov now, who's 4-0 since losing his UFC debut against Volkan Oezdemir a couple years ago now, I believe that was. And that was a submission loss to Volkan Oezdemir, which the only submission win in Oezdemir's career. A huge red flag. I don't care if Guskov's on a 4-fight winning streak. That is a huge red flag to be submitted by a guy like Oezdemir. But he's done some solid work. Knocked out Zach Paunga. Survived early on the ground against Ryan Spann and eventually knocked him out. The submission win against Billy Alicana. Alicana had some good moments in that first round, but that short notice aspect of the fight seemed to catch up to Alicana, slowed down in the second round, and that opened up the finish for Guskov. And again, against Nikita Krylov. Krylov didn't shoot a single takedown, but I think you can credit the footwork, the angle cutting from Guskov, and then obviously the threat of the power that he presents, and that ultimately ended up paying off for him as he knocked out Krylov. I still have my question marks about Guskov. Sure, he's at an all-time high in terms of confidence with this 4-fight winning streak. Sure, his training camp is doing pretty well. Gore MMA. You got Walter Walker, who's snatching ankles left and right. You got Shar Magomedov, who's slowly building himself back up after that loss to Michael Venom Page. And now you got Guskov, who's on the cusp of beating a guy that used to hold the light heavyweight strap. But I think this is where the experience, the durability of Blachowicz to start coming into play. I think we'll see Blachowicz stay competitive in the striking room. Sure, Guskov might be able to land a big shot and put Blachowicz away that way, but at least there's not as much ring rust on Blachowicz now after being away from action from nearly 2 years between the Pereira and Ulberg fight. The Ulberg fight took place back in March. I'm sure he's staying in good condition. I'm sure he wants to prove himself still that he deserves to be at the top of the light heavyweight division, or at least damn near close to it. And then beating a guy that is very much finish or bust, in my opinion. I think Blachowicz can be competitive in the striking realm. I think he can mix in his takedowns well. I think he can showcase good control. And I actually wouldn't even be surprised if he ended up pulling off a submission victory here. It's been a while since he has won a fight by submission. I think it's been over 7 years, but it's all about styles, and I feel like this is one of those fights where he can showcase that grappling dominance against a guy that's so keen on looking to knock his opponent's head into orbit. So it's possible Guskov lands a big shot, but I'm going to lean on the experience, durability, and overall MMA advantage of Jan Blachowicz in this fight, and I'm even going to pick him to win this fight by submission. All right, next up in the bantamweight division, we got former flyweight and bantamweight champion Henry Cejudo looking to buck this 3-fight losing streak that he's on and brings him into this fight as a plus 235 underdog, going up against Peyton Talbott, who comes in at minus 275. Now, I think the worst thing that Cejudo could have ever done was retire at the top of the sport, especially if he intended on eventually coming back to the sport like he did when he came back 3 years after beating Dominic Cruz by knockout. If you guys remember, that was that very weird COVID pay-per-view. I think it was the first COVID pay-per-view where Cejudo finished Dominic Cruz. That's where we got the whole Keith Peterson, Dominic Cruz falling out, if you guys remember that. But then Cejudo took a bunch of time off, came back, got an immediate title shot against Aljamain Sterling, didn't look himself, and ended up losing that fight. Then he comes back, tries to take on Merab Dvalishvili, gets fucking dummied in that fight. And then last time around against Yudong Song, I think that was back in February where he headlined a Seattle fight card against him. And, Cejudo had success in that second round, but it didn't really seem like he was all that comfortable. And it seemed like the momentum was swinging back Yudong's way as Yudong shut down the wrestling of Cejudo and just landed the bigger, more impactful shots on the feet. And I think that's what caused Cejudo issues. And once he got, poked in the eye, I think he was more so looking for a way out. And I hate to say that, but I think Cejudo's at the stage of his career where he's like, I'm going to get the bag. If I can win the fight, I'm going to go try to win the fight. But if I'm losing, probably going to look for a way out. And I hate to say that because I'm a big Cejudo fan. But at 38 years old, fighting these young killers, there's nothing left for Cejudo to prove. I think more so he's doing this for his ego where he's just like, I'm going to keep fighting now until I get that win. Once I get that win, I'm going to call it a career. Because, 38 years old, I think he's going to be 39 in about 2 or 3 months as well. That's not a good age to be at bantamweight and still fighting these young killers who are, 10 years younger than you, trying to get themselves into title conversations. And that's what he's facing this weekend with Peyton Talbott. But just putting a quick bow on Cejudo, Olympic wrestling background, very much improved his striking game to kind of complement the rest of his mixed martial arts game. And we saw that when he got to the top of the sport, being the flyweight and bantamweight champion. But at this stage of his career, after that long layoff and all, I just don't think the sport's really much around for him anymore. Now, he's going up against Peyton Talbott, who was, every diehard MMA fans' next big thing, right? Like, everybody was super jacked about this guy. He was going out there and finishing guys left, right, and center, knocking guys out, had this weird and very unique personality that we had never seen before in the UFC. And then he came in as a minus, 1,500 favorite or minus 1,000 favorite against Raoni Barcelos to start off the year. And I'll admit, I got sucked into the hype too. I'm pretty good in terms of, being skeptical about these guys coming into the UFC with all these finishes and stuff, or even some possible glaring holes in their game. But I thought Talbott had done enough to improve his grappling defense, and then he would be able to knock Barcelos out. But Barcelos did a great job. Landed all the takedowns that he needed, grinded that fight out for over 10 minutes out of the 15 minutes that they shared the cage. Got taken down 8 out of the 15 attempts that Talbott was able to land. Or that Barcelos was able to land. And that was a good learning lesson for Talbott. He jumped around to different camps at that time, one of them even being Fight Ready, where he spent a few weeks training alongside Henry Cejudo. So when this matchup was made, it was a little bit like, hey, maybe Cejudo felt something in that training camp where he's like, or during the sparring sessions that came to be why he decided to take this matchup. But then Talbott showcased great work against Felipe Lima. He was able to land better shots, showcase good takedown defense, good grappling defense. He was still getting taken down, but he was showcasing good discipline and actually working back to his feet, which is something he really couldn't do all that often against Raoni Barcelos. He's a nasty striker, good power, young, has a ton of experience to still try to get through and try to prove himself. And this is a big-time fight for him going up against somebody as accomplished as Henry Cejudo. I think Talbott's fighting him at the right time. I think he, 6-inch height advantage, 3-inch reach advantage. I think he's going to be able to exaggerate that. I think he's going to land some big shots here against Cejudo. I think he could even land a big enough shot to put Cejudo away. But I'm not going to get sucked into his hype again here at minus 275. Even though Cejudo's on a 3-fight losing streak, he still looked decent against Yadong Song to win a round. I believe it was unanimously as well against Yadong Song. And now to go up against a guy like Talbott, who's not experienced as Yadong Song, who doesn't have as much good of a strength of schedule as Yadong Song, there could be ways that Cejudo could steal a round or two here, whether it's with his takedowns, whether it's him landing with some power of his own. But I think more often than not, we're going to see Talbott land big shots, counter Cejudo, maybe stop the takedowns or at least work quickly back to his feet. And I think from there, he ends up landing more shots and winning this fight on the scorecards. But I wouldn't be mad at anybody looking to take a little bit of a shot on Cejudo, considering how wide the odds are here and seeing the issues that we've seen from Talbott in the past. Maybe Cejudo still has enough of his wrestling game that can be effective to put Talbott into those bad spots. So I'm going to go Talbott by decision, but I will take a long, hard look at Cejudo, maybe even Cejudo by decision, given the odds that we're getting. All right, that brings us to our flyweight matchup here, which could potentially be seen as a number one contender fight, where we have Brandon Moreno coming in at plus 115, going up against Tatsuro Taira, who comes in at minus 135. Starting off on the Moreno side of things now, we got Moreno on a 2-fight winning streak. That's on the back end of losing his title to Alexandre Pantoja and then having that very weird performance against Brandon Royval, where he seemed to be very predictable with the strikes he was throwing, the combinations he was throwing. It seemed like Royval got a beat on it pretty quickly, and he was able to punish Moreno for the shots that he was throwing and kind of just telegraphing as well. But we saw a great version of Moreno against Albazi when he headlined against him, I believe, last year in Edmonton. Showcased good striking, a little bit more of a diversified striking game compared to then what he showed against Royval in the fight prior. And showcased, at 31 years old, he's still capable of fighting at a very high level. And then the Steve Erceg fight. a little bit of a pedestrian fight there from both guys, but I thought Moreno did a good job in terms of countering the sticking and moving style of Usyk, but it wasn't a dominant performance by any means. The Albazi fight, that was a dominant performance, not so much the Usyk fight, but Moreno is a guy that's kind of overachieved in his career. He is a good fighter, don't get me wrong, but not a lot of people expected him to be fighting for a title, numerous occasions to be a champion when he was, to win the title back when he lost it. He's still capable of potentially finding himself in a title fight once again at 31 years old. Good boxing when he's in his groove, has a decent enough grappling game when he wants to rely on it, but I think it comes down to matchups for him now. And this is a tough one that he has against the Japanese standout Tatsuro Taira, who did a great job in terms of bouncing back from his lone professional defeat at the hands of Brandon Royval. Very close fight. That was a fight that I thought was 2-2 going into the final round. Taira, the rounds that he won was with him getting the back of Royval and controlling it for the entirety, and was able to land some good shots, threatened with a few submission attempts as well. But then when Royval was able to stop the takedowns and stop his get back from getting taken, Royval was obviously touching him up on the feet. That final round, we saw Taira get the back of Royval, but Royval was very diligent and quick in terms of working out of that spot so that he could reverse the position and then get off on his own damage and win that fight with that last round specifically. But we saw Taira run through Hyun Sung Park in his comeback fight. It was a very short notice fight for Hyun Sung Park. I think Taira was supposed to fight Amir Albazi, but Albazi pulled out, and they were trying to find a replacement ASAP, and Park was the only guy that was capable of taking it. And we saw Taira hurt him on the feet and eventually finish him, I believe, in that second round with the submission. Taira is a very nasty grappling specialist and does a great job in terms of taking the back of his opponents, either strangling them from there, getting TKO opportunities, or even controlling them and forcing them to fight off their back the entire time. His striking is improving, as we're obviously seeing. He knocked out Carlos Hernandez. Obviously those big shots that he landed against Hyun Sung Park, showcasing his improvements there. And he's 25 years old. So this kid has all the time in the world in terms of trying to make it to the next level and get to a championship level as well. And this weekend will show us whether he's ready for that or not, going up against somebody as experienced and a former champion like Brandon Moreno is. Now, this is one of those fights where Moreno obviously has the striking advantage, but I think Taira has made enough improvements from his overall game that he might be able to, not be competitive with Moreno in the striking realm, but at least stay active enough there that he can eventually mix in a clinch opportunity. And we know Taira, he doesn't necessarily need a takedown to get the win or to get the position that he needs. He just get to that grappling, get to the back of his opponents, hop onto their back, sink in that body lock, and then just go to work from there. And I think Moreno is susceptible to being put in those positions and not having the best solutions to work out of those positions. And Taira is one of the best in terms of doing that. I know his strength of schedule may not showcase that as of yet, but I think this is one of those spots where he will showcase it in those opportunities when he sees them. The Royval fight, Royval is a lot more squirmy, a lot more scrambly than Moreno, and I think that's where the difference will be here, where Taira should be able to get those spots that he needs to grind Moreno out here. Just some quick stats here. Moreno showcases a 64% takedown defense rate. He's been taken down in 12 of his 18 UFC fights, including 8 of his last 9 fights, and he mainly seems to struggle against guys that can effectively get him down or at least get to dominant positions long enough to really implement their style. And Taira is one of the trickiest in terms of dealing with that grappling style. So I'm going to go Taira here. Normally I like to fade these upcoming prospects, but I think stylistically speaking, this is a good enough spot for Taira to get the positions he needs to grind Moreno out. So give me Taira and Taira by decision. All right, that leads us to our first title fight of the night, as we have champion of the flyweight division. We got Alexandre Pantoja coming in at minus 225, going up against Joshua Van, who comes in at plus 190. Now, Pantoja has been on an absolute wrecking streak as of late, and now he's looking for his 5th title defense after winning it against Brandon Moreno. This guy has done a great job in terms of getting fights into the grappling room and either submitting his opponents or controlling them long enough to win the rounds. The Moreno fight was very close. That one could have gone either way. The Royval fight was pretty easy for Pantoja to get the takedowns and secure those positions. The Steve Erceg fight is the one that I often circle to be like, hey, these are the holes in Pantoja's game, and Erceg was the one that was most well-equipped for those positions, but it was bad fight IQ in that 5th round that cost Erceg that fight, as I thought it was a very winnable fight for him. Erceg was, he has a BJJ black belt and has a very good Muay Thai game as well. And I think that allowed him to be very competitive with Pantoja in the striking game and start to look even better as that fight got into deeper water, knowing that Pantoja often slows down. His body language usually isn't that great. But once Pantoja gets into a grappling sequence, normally he does a good enough job in terms of getting to that dominant position and then securing it and grinding it out. And that's what he was able to do against Erceg. And then in that 5th round against Erceg, I thought Erceg thought he was down on the scorecards, and that's why he was taking a little bit more risks and more willing to get into the grappling realm with Pantoja. And that's where Pantoja was able to eke out those rounds. And you can see the expression on Erceg's face once that fight, once the scorecards were read, he realized how close of a fight that actually was. And he was like, fuck, like maybe if I did a little bit different in that 5th round, kept my range, kept my kicking game going, maybe he would have come out with his hand raised there. But Pantoja did remind us of his dominance in his next 2 fights, as he submitted Kaya Sakura pretty quickly and then submitted Kai Kara France in the 2nd or 3rd round of their matchup. But Pantoja, nasty striker early, but heavily reliant on that grappling. I think if you have a guy that has good enough takedown defense or gets back to his feet immediately and has a striking advantage and has a better gas tank than Pantoja, those are the types of guys that are going to cause the champion problems, especially as Pantoja continues to get up there in age, right? He's 35 years old. He is a guy, that we know. Once you get up to that 35-year-old mark, especially in the flyweight division, it's going to start to come back to bite you. Your durability may not be as good. The hardware, again, your ability to take damage, your cardio, all that stuff may not hold up as well. It's tough to tell over his last 2 fights, but I think it's come down to the stylistic matchups he's had ahead of him. And here against Joshua Van, I think we're going to see him get tested once again. Now, Van has done a great job in terms of getting himself back into title talks, especially after that loss that he suffered in July of 2024 against Charles Johnson. That was a fight that was 1-1 going into the 3rd round, but I think like seconds into that 3rd round, we saw Charles Johnson land a big shot to put Van away. But Van got on the horse right away, got back onto it, fought Edgar Chairez, defeated him at the Sphere, went up against Cody Durden, defeated him, went up against Ray Tsuruya, defeated him, all while showcasing great takedown defense, great get-ups if he was taken down. And then his patented striking approach where he just picks opponents apart, butchers the body, makes the guard drop down, get to the head, lands his hooks. Very nasty work that we often see from Van. I love his striking style, and I think that's why we saw such a nasty performance when he went up against Brandon Royval, a guy that was more than willing to engage with him in the striking and in the pocket. And I think that's why Van came out successful that night, because Van was just a cleaner striker and he was able to land the more impactful shots against Royval. And those guys, they combined for 419 significant strikes landed in 15 minutes. Absolutely crazy. And I think Van took that fight. Yeah, that was a short notice opportunity just 3 weeks after he had knocked out Bruno Silva. So this is a kid that's always ready to go, and I thought it was great for him to take that opportunity on the same night that Pantoja defended his title against Kai Kara France, and then we got that showdown and face-off at the end of the night, or at the end of the Pantoja fight, knowing that this one was going to be the next one up. So we got Van with the obvious striking advantage. After that first round or so, Pantoja is a nasty Muay Thai guy as well, so don't get me wrong, he'll definitely be able to crack Van on the feet, especially if Van is successful in keeping this fight upright early. Pantoja, obvious grappling threat. But I think Van, with the help of a guy like Daniel Pineda, who's a very good grappler himself, should be well equipped for this fight. We often see very good submission defense from him. He may get taken down every now and then, but seeing how he reacted and was able to work back to his feet as quickly as he did against a guy like Ray Tsuruya gives me some confidence that he could potentially have some success here against Pantoja. Now, don't get me wrong. Obviously, Pantoja is better than Tsuruya. I think Tsuruya is a better wrestler than Pantoja, but I think Pantoja is a better BJJ specialist than Tsuruya, so he might be able to get some more control time. But if Van can keep his composure, if his back gets taken, if he finds himself in a bad position, and if he doesn't get submitted early, I think this is a fight where he starts rolling downhill as this fight gets into deeper water, and he starts picking apart Pantoja, maybe even mustering up a late finish, as Pantoja, like I said, his body language always looks bad late in fights, and Van will make him pay for that. As long as he doesn't, I'd be surprised if he willingly engages in the grappling realm the way that Steve Erceg did. If Van keeps his space, attacks the body, that will obviously help him keep his hands low enough that he can jack Pantoja back up should Pantoja get in on a deep takedown attempt. If he can continue to do that and wear Pantoja down, this is a very winnable fight for the youngster. So, another fight similar to the last one, right? I picked Taira against Moreno. I'm going to go youngster over vet here in Pantoja. I'm going to go with Joshua Van. I think he gets the late TKO here against Pantoja. And I'm going to go and new flyweight champion, Joshua Van. All right, that brings us to the Bantamweight Championship headliner here as Merab Dvalishvili comes in at minus 400, looking for his fourth title defense of 2025, going up against Petr Yan, who's coming in at plus 330 and looking for his fourth straight victory. Let's start off on the champion side of things now, who's been on in a crazy 14-fight winning streak after dropping his first 2 UFC fights. He's now the champion. He's now defended it a bunch of times, and it took him 10 straight fights or 10 straight wins to earn himself a title shot against Sean O'Malley. And that night at the Sphere, he was able to ragdoll O'Malley and eventually win that title. Then he rematched O'Malley after defeating Umar Nurmagomedov. He submitted O'Malley. I believe that was back in mid-2025. And then he was able to defeat Corey Sandhagen, I believe, back in October. And now here he is looking to take on Petr Yan once again. Now, Dvalishvili, technically speaking, may not do the best work, right? But it's that high activity, high output, forward pressure, constant, threat of either strikes, which obviously he's improving that aspect of his game. Nearly finished Corey Sandhagen on the feet in his last fight back in the second round, to his obvious takedown attempts, right? He, against Corey Sandhagen, I don't remember. He landed 20 of his 37 takedown attempts over 25 minutes against Corey Sandhagen. But we know it's not about controlling his opponents. It's about setting that high pace so that he can wear these guys down and really implement the rest of his game. But one thing that we clearly see over his last couple of fights is that he's trying to work for that finish more. He's not a big power puncher, but we are seeing him throw with a little bit more vitriol. He's not much of a submission specialist, but he is threatening with takedowns or submissions like we saw against Sean O'Malley. So he's trying to, he has the wacky fighter mentality, but he's trying to get that finish as well, which I think would take him to that next level of really becoming a star and really becoming a UFC favorite amongst the UFC brass. If you're going to finish this guy, you got to land that big shot on the chin. I think really that's the only way you can beat him. He's not going to tap, just as we saw when he lost to Ricky Simon with that last second thing that happened. And he's not going to, you're not going to beat him on points. He's just going to always have much more activity than you. If there is a guy to do it, we thought it was going to be Umar Nurmagomedov. And Nurmagomedov did pretty well for the first 2 rounds before the pace and pressure of Dvalishvili caught up to him. We thought it was going to be Petr Yan, but he completely shut Petr Yan down 2.5 years ago when they main evented a fight night. That night, Yan came in as a minus 245 favorite, and now he finds himself as a plus 330 dog because of how dominant Dvalishvili looked that night. Now, let's quickly talk about Yan before I get to my official prediction for this fight. Since losing to Dvalishvili, Yan has come back and won 3 fights. He defeated Song Yadong by decision, 3 rounds. He defeated Davison Figueiredo by decision over 5 rounds. And then he defeated Marcus McGee by 3-round decision. But the issues that we saw often in Yan's fights is that he's a slow starter. He lost the first round against Yudong. I believe he lost the first round against Marcus McGee. But once he gets his read, once he gets his timing, he is a nasty striker, and that's when he often takes command of fights, starts walking his opponents down, landing his nasty combinations, battering the legs of his opponents, switching up the targets, and he can even lean on some grappling if he needs to, just as he showed in the third round against Marcus McGee. He's a solid fighter. He's one of the best bantamweights, easily. But this is a very bad matchup for him. If he can't land that big shot, if he can't dictate the pace of the fight, if he can't be the one in the center of the cage, he loses. That's the issue here with Dvalishvili. Dvalishvili does not give an inch. This guy might for a second just to reset, might back up, might pivot off, get back into the center of the cage. And then from there, we see Dvalishvili get to his work. And he was able to do that, rinse and repeat against Jan when they fought. Dvalishvili holds a 22% takedown accuracy rate. What was it? So going into the first Jan fight, I thought that Jan would be able to stop the takedowns of Dvalishvili, and he did. He stopped, 38 of the 49 takedown attempts that Dvalishvili had against him, and Dvalishvili was able to get 7 minutes of control time, but it's that constant work that muzzled the offense of Jan, and I think Dvalishvili will once again do that again here. I think Jan's going to have to crack him with a big shot if he wins, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think we'll see Dvalishvili once again do what he does best, set the pace, set the pressure, wear Jan down. Jan's not going to gas, but Jan's going to start questioning himself again in terms of what shots can I get off on to try to find some success. We might see him a little bit more reckless, a little bit more aggressive, kind of like what we saw with Alex Pereira against Magomed Ankalaev, but I just don't think that's going to work out for him. I think that's just going to lead to easier takedown attempts for Dvalishvili, and that starts to muzzle Jan's game, and we see Dvalishvili just win once again. So I'm going to go and still bantamweight champion Merab Dvalishvili, and hopefully we see him. I don't know who's next for him. I can't think of off the top of my head, but I think we're going to see Dvalishvili hold on to this title at least to the ending of 2026, and maybe age starts being his biggest opponent. But I'm going to go Dvalishvili here, and Dvalishvili by decision. All right. Pretty long episode this time around, and I think it's because I had that 1 week off. I don't know if it's because I'm holding my mic this time around that it gives me a little bit more. I want to talk a little bit more, but I really dug into a lot of these fights for you guys. I hope you guys appreciate it. Appreciate the love as always. Appreciate the support. Again, appreciate you guys bearing with me as I go through another transition period with my studio and setup. But in the new year, we will have everything set up properly, looking crisp, video looking nice, lighting looking all good. So you'll just have to wait to the new year to see that. But we still got 2 more UFC events to go through, including this one and the following week's UFC Vegas 112. All right, that's a wrap. I'll be back tomorrow for the top 3 lock of the night candidates. I'll see you guys then. Peace.
Last thing.